Hi there. My name is David Batsoffen, and I host a travel blog called Travel and Things. I'm currently doing a series called In Conversation With. And not too long ago, my wife and I were on holiday. I'd run out of stuff to read, and I picked up one of her books, and she said to me, "You're not going to enjoy this. It's a book for women." And I said, "Well, I have nothing else to read. It's either this or a cereal packet." And I thoroughly enjoyed the book. And now I'm talking to the owner. Or not to the owner, to the author. Well, she is the owner of the characters, Sally Andrew. Sally, hi, welcome.
Hi, David. Thank you. I'm so glad you chose me over your cereal box.
Well, it was a sort of a challenge. It's a chick book. And I went, all right. I lived in small town South Africa. I can identify with these people. Let me read the book and then I'll make a comment. And I loved every single minute of it.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
And
I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Thank you.
I want to just show you, before we start, I just want to give you a little bit of a view because I especially chose this time so you could see a little bit of the Karoo sunset, although something even more exciting is happening as we might even get a bit of rain, although it's not quite as dramatic visually, but it's much more exciting for the Karoo. So I'm on my neighbor's stoep, so it's not exactly my own home view, but it's very much where I am in the nature reserve. So I just want to give you a little bit of a visual of it.
Thank you so much.
I'll just step out the way and turn the computer so you can see. Let me bring it more about here. Give you a little bit of a view on the Toesberg. We had some lovely snow not long ago, but it's no longer there. There's a little bit more. I'm sort of more in that direction. Is my house is Hoek.
Okay. Listen, for green screen, that's really good quality,
For what screen? Green screen.
Green screen, yeah.
Yeah, I'm quite an etard, so I don't know any words. I still wonder with a Zoom meeting, I'm waiting for where are we going to Zoom? What are we going to do? When am I going to get on the bike?
Take us back to...
What I should also show you while I'm showing things that you can't see on the screen are, whoops, I've lost you.
No, I'm here.
Yikes. Oh, but I can't see you.
You may have
switched.
You may
I'm
have
going to click again.
Because I can see you and I can hear you.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah. Now we're there. I just wonder what else I could show you before you settle down. Just in my face is my my red fillies.
Hey, you and David Kramer.
They make an appearance. Actually, let me hold the screen still and move the filly. They make an appearance in book 3, Death on Limpopo.
Okay, we'll get to that.
So apart from the view of the Karoo and the red fillies, that is real. Everything else is fiction.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning, as Mary Poppins said, because it's a very good place to start. Let's talk about this particular. Talk me through the beginnings of Tannie Maria.
In the beginning, sometimes people ask me that question and I want to burst into song, since we're talking about Mary Poppins more, the sound of music is, how do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you catch a cloud and pin it down? It's a bit like the same of a notion, is where did you get it from? How do you capture an idea? But the timing of it was when I write, I think any book, they usually originate when I go onto trips deep into the wilderness.
Right.
My partner Bowen Bosher is an artist. I see from your background that you may be an artist too.
It's my father-in-law.
And your father-in-law, okay. Yeah. And so we go he's a wilderness artist, and we go into trips deep in the bush where we go away for weeks, months at a time with our own water and our own food and our own firewood and our own so we were deep in the Brandberg with still another barrel or two of slightly guava flavored water, because that was the barrels that we filled. We used to have guava juice in them. And this day I was staying at home because I'd had an encounter with a leopard the day before, but that's another story. But I was
for book 4.
Camp bound. Yeah, the story before. So I was camp bound and I was sitting under the Camille Doring tree and I was conceiving of what would I like to write next. And I started, I think, with the themes. So I wanted to write about the theme of love, and I wanted to explore the theme of love, but not so not just romantic love. And I thought an agony aunt would be a fun way of exploring love in its range of ways. And I was looking for a character. Sorry, I'm just looking for my book here. I was looking for a character who could explore that theme, but who was also very down to earth and grounded. I tend to go off on the intellectual side of things. I tend to be more on the cloud that you got to pin down. And Tannie Maria, I wanted someone who was grounded and relatable too. I wanted to write in a genre that I enjoy. I just love reading murder mysteries and more the old-fashioned kind, so sort of tending towards the cozy type. And I wanted to explore. I also wanted her to be a little bit off the wall. So I needed to invent something about her that made her a little bit crazy, which I chose to be her food obsession. But I've since come to realize that a lot of people actually have the same obsession. I don't want to suggest they're all crazy, but there is an aspect to it, and she is in the other league. But then what happens with me when I write a book is then I have those notions and I write them down, and I've still got the notes from them. But then I sit and I write and I try and hear her voice. So with her, I just sat and listened to her voice, and she said, "Isn't life funny? You know, how one thing leads to another in a way you just don't expect." That Sunday morning, I was in my kitchen stirring my apricot jam in the cast iron pot. It was another dry summer's day in the Klein Karoo, and I was glad for the breeze coming in the window. "You smell lovely," I told the appelkoos confit. When I call it apricot jam, it sounds like something in a tin from the spa. But when it's confit, you know it's made in a kitchen. My mother was Afrikaans, and my father was English, and their languages are mixed up inside me. I taste in Afrikaans, and I argue in English, but if I swear, I go back to Afrikaans again. The apricot confit was coming right, getting thick and clear when I heard the car. I added some apricot kernels and a stick of cinnamon to the jam. I did not know that the car was bringing the first ingredient in a recipe for love and murder. But maybe life is like a river that can't be stopped, always winding towards or away from death and love. Back and forth, heen and weer. Still, even though life moves like that river, lots of people go their whole lives without swimming. I thought I was one of those people. So when I heard her say that, I got a good sense of her.
Yay! Just as a matter of interest, Sally, do you find that when people write to you about your books, and I'm sure lots of people do they say, you know, in that particular recipe, if you'd only added another stick of cinnamon, or maybe if you'd used some nutmeg, it would have been much better, because that's how my Oma or my mom used to make it, type of thing?
I haven't had that, I think, for two reasons. The one is that I don't make my email address readily available.
Clever lady.
Although there is quite a lot of chatting that goes on Facebook and Twitter and stuff, so I do hear that. And secondly, mainly I hear that people really liked it, just as it was. But I'm not a natural chef. That'll be one of the questions that I can give a longer answer to, that people assume that I'm a natural chef, but I'm not. I do enjoy food and I enjoy cooking, but I'm not a proper foodie and a chef. So I go to an enormous amount of trouble and work and research to get my recipes right. So I have sessions where I sit with people and they say, add that extra stick of cinnamon. And then they say, no, remove that extra stick of cinnamon. Then we try it this way and we try it that way. And some recipes, you know, we test 10 times, or especially the ones we have to invent. So I think a lot of that happens beforehand.
I was going to say, is there a recipe, a Tannie Maria's Recepte book in the offing as well, perhaps?
Yes, there is. That's going to come next. There's going to be book 4, which which is going to come after this one, which will be set in. Oh, that reminds me, I must put on my lipstick also. There we are. I forgot, for Zoom you must put your lipstick on.
Oh no! This is lip ice. I had hair and makeup earlier this afternoon. I was ready.
Oh, did you do that earlier? Okay. Yeah. That's just so you got to put on lip ice so you can let yourself smile big. Otherwise, your lips crack.
Well, this is so exactly it. So
yes. So the
book
recipe book. Yeah. So book 4, the novel will come out, and then that'll be followed by the recipe book, and then that should have all the recipes, or certainly all the best recipes, and nog 'n paar bygevoeg. Because I don't know if you notice, in a lot of the recipes are mentioned in the book, but I don't really have space to put in
Yeah.
all of them at the end. I only put in 15. So there are quite a few really nice recipes that I want to share.
Coming out just in time for Christmas, people.
In like 4 years' time.
Yeah. Talk to me about Sally in matric. What was she like? Did she know what she wanted to be?
Matric. Jeez. Sally in matric was hardcore. She knew from when she was in standard 6, she changed from French to Latin because she wanted to be a lawyer in a trade union, and she knew it would help if she had Latin. She was doing 4 languages. She was a clever egg, as my mother would say. Although some subjects I did well at, it was complete fluke. I don't know why. I think I just did lots and lots of papers, or they mismarked it or mixed me up with someone else, because I did well in science, and usually I did very well in languages. I did English, Afrikaans, Xhosa, Latin. Can't remember the other one.
It doesn't matter.
No, that's 4. That's 4.
Yeah.
And it was the 80s, and there was a lot of marches, and UDF had just been formed. This was 85, and myself and there was a class of us at Westerford High School who were all quite hardcore activists and going to social issue groups and linking with township things, and it was quite a dramatic time to be young. And then after school as well, then in those early years, there was a revolution, and we were part of that, and it was very exciting and dramatic and scary, and it was quite a time to grow up quite fast. And I traveled overseas quite soon after matric. I grew up quite young. And now I'm learning to be young again. I'm aging backwards.
What does that mean? Was it Benjamin Buttons who aged backwards?
Oh, yeah.
About a fellow who gets born very old, and then as he gets older, he gets younger. So at what part, or at what stage of your life did you say, I now want to be an author?
That was very recent. I'm 50-something now. Of the age that I actually can't quite remember if it's 51, 2 or 3. Not because my memory's gone, but because those things don't matter so much. When I'm 55, right, I'll notice when I'm 60. So it's quite late to be really feeling and finding your career. But everything I did before that built up to that. So I was interested in psychology. I was and each thing I studied, I also did in practice. So I was studying law, and then I did paralegal work, and then I was studying psychology, and I did voluntary counseling work. So and mostly when I did the thing in practice, I realized, no, I didn't want to do that. And then I moved to adult education. And then I think what led me to writing in the end was I got chronically ill. Some of that related to the stress of struggle and my response to it. I got into a really high adrenaline state, and it was an intense time, lots of arrests and detentions of people around me or myself. And I got into a very highly stressed state that took the form of ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. And I kind of went to bed for 10 years or a bit longer. I was really, really ill. I couldn't brush my hair. I couldn't walk. And then I went through various processes to get better, including a fast of 17 days. And it's been a long journey. But one aspect of that journey was I finally, once I was so wrecked I could barely brush my hair and couldn't see anyone, I finally said, I wonder what I really like doing. And I finally gave myself permission to write. I had always written. I mean, I remember even writing stories at school that were versions of Winnie the Pooh, and really loving that, and finding stories so real. Like, was it Mary Poppins you mentioned? No, it was someone else. Anyway, so I remember putting my mouth to a Mary Poppins book and breathing it in, and thinking that if I did that, I would experience that laughing gas thing where they all float. I really believed in the power of words. I literally felt I could breathe it in.
Sally, I don't know what drugs they were giving you, but they were obviously really good if you're trying to breathe in words of somebody else's book.
So there's been that love of writing there, and through my struggle days, a lot of what I did was creative. I'm just pouring my tea, but
no, it's fine.
Since it's getting cold. I hope you're having your tea and your biscuit.
Talking about that.
So a lot of the political work I did was cultural work as well. So when I was in the ANC Women's League, I was part of the cultural group. When I was working with the Domestic Workers Union, it was also the cultural group. And often at events, I'd read and write poetry or do performances. So there was that creative thread and strand throughout what I did.
Yeah.
And I worked with something called Action Workshop that did struggle. It was more drama, and I was interested in the work of Paulo Freire, and that was a big part of when I studied adult education at UWC. That was a big part of what we did as well, was looking at more pedagogy of the oppressed. And I'm saying it, pedagogy.
Yeah, doesn't matter.
I should know how to pronounce things.
No, does it matter? I have to tell you that was not the answer I was expecting at all. Much like when I interviewed Athol Fugard many years ago, and I had to ask him the question, why did you leave South Africa? Fully expecting him to say, David, it was because of the political situation and I was hounded out of my house in Port Elizabeth, etc., etc. And he went, I wanted to earn real money so I could fish. And it actually threw me quite drastically, because it came so far out of left field that I really did not know. And I sort of looked at him and I went, really? And he went, yep. I said, all right, we can move on from there.
No, you got to scrap questions numbers 2 to 7 now and move on
to question 8. I have no questions, Sally. I have never gone into, I've done one interview in my entire radio career where they gave me not only the questions, but the answers. So, and it was about making tea. So I had to say to the interviewee, so how do you make a cup of tea? And then he would read his answer. And at a particular point, I think question 2 or 3, I took the paper out of his hand and I tore it up. And I said to him, talk to me about tea. And he looked terrified. And at the end of the interview, which was about 20 minutes or so, he went straight to the station manager and said, I can't do this. I was called in afterwards and I said, if you supposedly a tea expert, surely you know how to make a cup of tea. You don't need me to have the questions and the answers. I can just interview myself and do voices. I don't need him in the studio at all.
Shame. I can relate to that though. When I did my first book launch for Recipes for Love and Murder, Sandra Prinsloo, she'd done the audio for these books, by the way. They are amazing. Right. She just reads them.
Bless her. I love her to pieces.
Oh, I love her. I don't know her very well, but I love her. And she interviewed me in Cork Bay Books for my first launch, and I did exactly that. I gave her every question to ask, and I'd prepared my answers. And she was such a pro that it looked like she was making up the questions on the spot, but I was clearly sitting there reading the answers. I just didn't have it's just a skill and a confidence that you take for granted as a radio interviewer. But I mean, I was terrified, and I also felt like committed that I wanted to entertain people, and there were important things to say and do, and it was a good show. We put on a good show. Just she'd learned her lines and I hadn't.
that's
and I had a really good red ball gown, a debutante dress on, so that kind of like covered for the lack of learning the lines. And the red fellies, of course.
Of course. Are the red fellies sort of your signature footwear?
No, I just like them. They've kind of become like that. And that is one of the things that I did. I was able to buy a whole lot of fellies that were tax deductible. And I really like fellies. So I've got quite a collection of red and purple, but my red ones are my favorite ones. And then I finally gave Maria a red pair in book 3.
Why not?
I've had my own red for a long time. Yeah.
Just talking about that, when you write, do you write longhand or do you write with a laptop?
Laptop. Okay. I can't read my own writing anymore.
Aren't we all like that? I recently interviewed people and I was writing notes when I was interviewing them. And I thought I was doing tremendously well. And no sooner they walked away from the table and I looked down and I went, I don't know what I've written. I'm going to have to make up this whole thing all over again because I don't know what I'd written. It made absolutely no sense.
It's even worse. I was doing it the other night. It's even worse if you write your notes on a piece of toilet paper. Even more illegible. It was just some on the table. I didn't have paper and I wrote it on there. Or your hand, it just smudges.
Just with that in mind, Sally, have you sort of ever been sitting at a restaurant or something, and all of a sudden you get an idea? So you jot it down on a serviette or on the back of, I don't know, a menu or something, so that later when you sit down in front of your laptop, you can go, okay, let me just put this in because I know that I'm going to use it in chapter 16 or whatever.
Yeah, this is so important. It's really like, yeah, look, and I wrote this down, and it says, there's definitely some chocolate sauce involved, because I can see that. Yeah, occasionally, but I must say I do most of my thinking when I'm sitting writing, unless, excuse me, at least I'm allowed to cough on Zoom.
You can cough on television as well. It's the done thing nowadays.
So, but most of my thinking I do when I'm sitting writing, unless I've got a particular issue that I'm trying to resolve, and then I tend to think it through when I'm walking or running. But I don't do a lot of, I have a bit of a separate life. I'm not constantly have my characters talking to me in words. I kind of have the energy with me.
Okay. That was going to be my next question. Are you a disciplined writer? Do you sort of wake up at 5 and write from 5 to 9? Or do you sort of sit down during the course of the day and go, all right, I've got a half an hour, let me scribble down a chapter or two?
I get started at the crack of noon, more or less.
Whenever there's no load shedding.
Well, there's no load shedding in the Karoo. It's all we operate on solar power and things.
Okay.
So if then my tablet's right. I mean, it's all relative. Compared to those who wait for the muse, I'm incredibly disciplined. Compared to those who just get up and get started and works from 7 to whatever. I mean, what I've found is that I've got 3 to 4 hours of juice in a day. And whether I start early or start late, I could only do those. Because I was very ill, and even when I was writing, I was ill. And I only had 3 or 4 functioning hours in a day, and I dedicated them all to writing. And then when I got better, I thought, great, now I can write for 6, 7, 8 hours, but I couldn't. I could do other things, and I do admin, and there's a lot of kind of life management, those, sheep to herd and the water to collect from the stream. And the sheep aren't true, but the water we do get from the stream, and just life stuff.
Yeah.
And we're still building, and when I'm in town, there's just staff appointments, every 6 months at least. I've got to get my toenails done. So
that's why you wear bellies, so nobody can see your toenails.
No, they're done now.
Oh, good.
In fact, if it had been because of the Zoom interview, just in case you made me step up the bellies. So I'm disciplined, but not very, and I've been through phases of more and less. Sometimes I'm under a lot of druk, but I'm certainly not of the writer school where you must wait for the muse. You don't wait for the muse. You write every day like a job, and if the writing's bad, you rewrite it. You don't wait till you can do it. I've had one day. It's not quite the question you're asking, but it is related. I think I've had one day when I've had what might be called writer's block. One day when I've sat down with intention to write and I couldn't write anything.
Yeah.
And that was related to, I'd done a big public event, and it somehow had messed with me. Big successful public event, actually. And I somehow felt too small after my ego had been so inflated.
At the end of the day, though, when you started your first book, when you started this, did you set yourself did you have a deadline? Were these commissioned, or did you sort of go, look, I'll write and then I'll try and get them published?
I very much wanted to be published. I mean, I wanted to make a career of writing, but I knew I wasn't, and I did research in terms of what was selling, and I thought, okay, I can't do that. I can't do the gory crime. That's what's selling at the moment. I can't do vampires. I can't do all the hectic, bloody, revolting stuff that people are loving, just because I've got to live there every day, and I want to live somewhere that's a beautiful and happy place for me. Although maybe people who write that feel beautiful and happy when they do it, or it expunges something, or, I mean, we've each got our own fish to fry. But I did it because that's what I enjoy and I love it, but I did do it because I wanted it to be published. So unlike some other books I'd done, at least it fitted into a genre, where some of the other stuff I'd written wasn't really considering the publishing world and what was possible. So at least it was in a genre and a certain amount of lengths. And so I wrote it because I wanted to publish, but when I finished it, I was sending it to lots of publishers, well, actually agents, and some publishers are not having any luck. But I got enough encouragement. And one of the encouragements was I did an online course in New York. That mystery writers course was Gotham writers course. And I got such encouragement from Carol, I don't know how you say her surname, it's Bugge, Bugge or Bug. She was so positive about the book that it gave me enough hope to carry on writing book 2 while I was looking for publishers and agents. So I did have I had multiple rejections. And I did start targeting agents overseas, because if you want to get published overseas, you need an agent. I did want to be able to earn a living from it, and I knew that South African publishing. So that wasn't my starting point. But then I did at some point approach publishers directly. And then quite soon after that, I then got an agent. I was very lucky to get an agent, the Blake Friedman Literary Agency, Isabel Dixon, who's also a Karoo girl. And so she took me on just after I had after Penguin Random in South Africa had taken my book on, and then she took over. And I've forgotten your question because I'm answering other things. I'm remembering a stream of events.
No, we were talking about, did you write knowing
so
you had a publisher?
So by the time I got an agent, I had a book and a half, which was very nice, because then she could sell the 2 books together.
Yeah.
And there was a whole chunk. And then the second one, so the first one I wrote and I rewrote and I polished, and there was at least 10 drafts. Second one, I also did a lot of drafts, but that was under pressure, because then I made publishers deals. And in fact, there were 23 different publishers involved, and a lot of them were buying the second book, and they were, one due in March and the translations due the next month. And so that was very pressured. And that, that nearly finished me off, actually. It wasn't great for my health. At that point, I was still quite ill. So that was on a baie druk, die tweede een. And then the third one, I said, I don't want to do so much druk asseblief. I'll hand it in when I'm ready.
Yeah.
And that was a bit of a mess up, because when I was ready, then I had to wait a long time before it got published, because there's quite a slow turnaround in the publishing world. Yeah. So it has been quite varied, the druk, but I always, I kind of take roughly a year to write and roughly a year to edit.
So it's not a quick process.
The first one I took longer. Yeah.
Well, I suppose for some writers, when I read your book, and the book that I read was Death on the Limpopo, when I was still doing radio book reviews, all the publishers knew that if they wanted me to review their book, there had to be a death on page 1, and it had to be a terrifying death that involved torture of all descriptions. And I remember, that was the go-to. And I remember Peter Godwin, who wrote When the Crocodile Eats the Sun. I said to him, your book just squeaked into my pile. And he said, what? I said, because there was a death on page 1, but it was your father. And when he died, they wanted him to be cremated, but there was no fuel for the crematoria in Zim at the time. So posthumously, he did a conversion to Hinduism, so they could build a funeral pyre and burn him. And that's the only reason I read his book, was because I liked the opening.
Then my books are very much on the other side of the field from you. I mean, they're very cute and cozy, and I mean, there's death in the title at least. Maybe that's why you picked it up, because it said Death on the Limpopo.
I told you, I picked it up because it was that or a cereal box. And I'm so glad I did. Your rejection letters in the beginning, have you kept any or all of them? And do you sort of go back and go, where, look how far I've come?
No, because a lot of them were very helpful and encouraging and educated me. There were also rejection letters. I had more rejection. I'd written a previous book, which was kind of an adventure story, which is kind of a bit of a eco-guerrilla modesty blaze kind of book. And there wasn't a death, and it wasn't a proper adventure. And I might revise it to make it a young adult thing at some point, but I just loved writing that so much. That was, my first book was actually when I moved slowly from writing educational books to writing fiction, and there was an in-between creative non-fiction where I wrote a book called Stories for Fire Dogs, which was then published by Findhorn Press as The Fire Dogs of Climate Change, which was engaging with the environmental crisis. And it was a mixture of facts and education and my personal exploration. And that was my crossover point. Before that, I had written, I kind of left that out in my story of writing. I was an educational writer. And when I was ill and I couldn't run workshops, I wrote educational books around various political, usually gender-based issues. And then that was really fun. And one of the people who read that, one of my rejection letters, was from a mainstream publisher who had got to by kind of mistake by email. I sent her the audio and they forwarded it to someone else. And they said, wow, you write really well. I can't publish this because it doesn't fit into any genre. If you ever write anything normal, please send it to me. And then that encouraged me enough to write a proper novel. And I just had such fun writing this novel, and with no boundaries and no, as I said, I didn't even have a genre, and I was just in pure bliss. And when I sent it to her, she said, no thanks. But it got me, the bug had been bitten. Then after that, I realized, okay, if I want to do this, I must actually, if it's a genre, a murder, mystery, then there's got to be a murder, just basic, really basic stuff. Yeah. And then I did that mystery writing course.
So let's move on to book 2.
Yeah, let me show you the South African version of it, because I quite like the continuity of the covers. This is the...
Oh, I see, okay.
Does it come in mirror format to you?
No, comes the right way.
On my screen, it's mirror forward, like a sort of book for dyslexics on the other side of the world.
No, that's upside down now, not reverse. It's interesting that in both covers, in yours she's hiding behind the saucepan, and here she's hiding behind the window of a car. And a red
they
head
only
in
do
both.
eyes. Yeah. They would have seen this one first and chosen their own. Okay. So they might have been influenced. But it is interesting. But I quite like that. You don't want to know exactly what your main character looks like. That's what the TV series is doing for everyone.
It's all part of the mystery and mystique of the Tannie.
Yeah.
So if you bump into her in small town South Africa, you won't know who she is.
You won't.
Yeah, unless she's on a Harley. But that was for book 3. So tell me about book 2. By this stage, now you said earlier, Sally, that you had sort of 1.5 books. So I take it this was the half book at that particular time. So did the Tannie sort of start speaking to you in this one and say, this is who I think I am, and this is what I think you should be doing with me?
Yeah, the thing is, once you create a convincing character, she does shape a fair amount of what happens, certainly on the psychological and spiritual level. On the terms of the murder story, I get more free reign there, and she's got to fit in. But it was something that came up. Also, one of the editors said, she might well have PTSD if she's been abused as a woman. And so it was something that I explored more. So she sits in on a group run by the Satanic Mechanic. So I sort of sometimes wonder, often when we chat, we talk as if we know everything instead of telling the basics. Yeah. So maybe for listeners, the Tannie Maria is a small town Tannie who lives in Ladysmith, which is near to where I live in real life. And she works for the Klein Crew Gazette, and she's an agony aunt columnist. And she works with Jessie, who's a young, feisty investigative journalist, and Hattie, who's quite sort of politically hardcore, and Hattie, who's a bit of a Mary Poppins type editor. And she's got the hots for Lieutenant Henk Kannemeyer with a chestnut moustache. And through her work, and sometimes through Jessie's investigative work, she gets drawn into murder investigation. So the first book was a woman who was abused, who was murdered. And in each of the books, Maria's working through her own personal journey as well as engaging with a murder mystery, and they're often interwoven. So she's having to develop strength and bravery. She compares herself in some ways to that rabbit in the headlights of the scooter, and she's got to learn not to be scared of her own shadow. And working with Jessie, the two of them are quite a tight team. They tackle these murder investigations, often to the irritation of the policemen, who both end up being... There's Kannemeyer, and then he works with Regardt, who ends up being involved with Jessie. Well, they've got a thing going. And of course, there's Piet, the San, or the Bushman tracker, who sees and knows a lot.
Everything. Yeah.
It's quiet. But so we've got these characters that are set up, and so once they're established, then I often just throw a situation at them and see how they all respond. But in book one was more of a traditional kind of whodunit. Was open-ended, could be a number of people in a small town. Then book two was more of a Agatha Christie closed circle group. So Tannie Maria joins this PTSD group. There's a San activist, land rights activist, who is in danger, and that leads to events. And so she does a parallel journey of working through her own past and her own issues at the same time as a murder mystery. And I sort of try to find a way of weaving the two together. But often there's the juices in her personal journey and in all the delicious food she makes. She's obsessed with food, and she uses it for her own personal purposes, but she also uses it to get clues. And she takes a cook and gets people talking, and she's got an observation and studying, so things that she notices about the pomegranate juice or the date on the lettuce and things, also a part of her clues that lead to finding the murderer. But book two is a little bit more, I suppose it just goes a little bit deeper into who and how she is, and her history and her relationship with her late husband, who used to abuse her, and working through that. It's also about her, she has to go through that in order to have sex. So in the first book, she holds hand. In the second book, her aim is to have sex. In the third book, there's more of it's about being able to say, I love you. So in each book, there's something quite archetypal and emotional that she goes through. And through the murder mystery, she also has to deal with personal things, and a lot of them are related to and revolve around the big policeman with the chestnut moustache, who's also got his own issues.
Everybody does. Do you think living where
Is it?
Let me tell you mine. You can use me in book 5.
Okay, cool.
Sally, living
No,
where
it's true. And the challenge is to find, what I try and find is, I'm trying to find her issues, because she's an independent character.
Right.
I'm trying to find archetypal issues that people will relate to. Partly because I think part of what drives what I do is I'm interested in healing. I'm interested in a better planet. I'm interested in a better spiritual, emotional life for humans on Earth, and I was interested in a gentler way that we step on the Earth. So those things do drive what I write, but I'm also, it's going to relate to my own personal journey as well. So in book 4 now, I was struggling with issues and exploring the theme of jealousy. So then Tannie Maria explores the theme of jealousy with me. So I also use my stories to some extent to be part of the journey I'm going on.
So then my question is, living where you do, and we won't give your address away because otherwise fans will flock to your farm.
They've got a long way to flock.
Listen, people will flock if they need to. They will camp outside your farm gates.
They're welcome. They're welcome.
You mentioned Ladysmith, and that's Ladysmith with an I, not with the KZN.
Yes.
Do you believe that living in the Karoo has helped you write these particular novels? Because if you lived in an urban setting like Cape Town or Johannesburg, you would have to dig deeper to invent the situations that these characters find themselves in.
Oh, totally. There's no ways I would have, that was one of the benefits of my being ill, is I escaped the world and came to somewhere peaceful. And then through that process, somehow threw myself back into the center of the world. Not the center, but still, it re-engaged me. But very much, I came here for the peace and quiet and escape. But I wouldn't have written the books at all if I wasn't living here and inspired by the place and the small town vibes. I'm not a lot of time in Ladysmith, and I try not to base things too much on actual people, but there certainly is a lot of overlap. And I've also sometimes invented characters and then discover they already exist. So that's been a bit scary.
Listen, small town. I lived in Nopoort for a year, which is in the Eastern Cape. It's near Cradock. And there everybody knows your business. And if you're not where you're meant to be, you can be walking down the street of an afternoon and somebody will stop you and go, David, you're meant to be at the dentist. Why are you here? And you go, how do you know? And they're like, no, well, the receptionist is a friend of a friend who told me you were coming because, and you sort of go, really? But there, we had an interesting, there was a coffee bar, and it was run by a local Christian agency, but it was called Die Shalom Coffee Krug. I'll never forget it. And they had no idea, because I stopped and I said, do you know what the word shalom means? And they had absolutely no idea. They just liked the word. Go figure.
It's like the name.
Yeah, just like the name. Anyway, that was No Poet for you, but No Poet has unfortunately fallen on very hard times, and the road bypasses it now, and very few people live there anymore.
The Shalom Cafe is probably closed altogether.
Well, I haven't been back there for the longest time. The last time I went back was to show my daughter and my wife where I'd spent some of my misspent youth. And the hotel that I'd lived in was, by that stage, just a pile of rubble. And when I inquired, somebody said to me, no, they'd had a gas explosion. The entire hotel had been flattened. And they just didn't need to rebuild it because there was no necessity for it, which was very sad in a way. And sort of, you know, like your characters, it's something that just came and went and was never replaced at the end of the day. When you write, and we established this a little earlier, you were saying a year to write, a year to edit, roughly. Do you know when to click the end or send the manuscript off? Or do you sort of go, maybe I can tweak it just a little bit, maybe, you know, this is not quite right or that is not quite right? Or do you have a definite ending and you go, the end, gone, thank you, that's as far as it's going?
Oh, I wish. Even if you think you do that, excuse me, even if you think you do that, the publishers, editors, you still got to go over everything again and again and again and again. I mean, it does help a little bit when you're working to publish a deadline that you can't redo it endlessly. And I can let go of a book. And I think what's useful about a series is once I've completed what I think is, a certain draft, I quite quickly start on the idea for the next.
Right.
Just so that I can have something pulling me forward, else I can polish and polish and polish. Because I love the story and I love writing the story, and most of the juice is in the first draft, although the edits take long. I also really enjoy the polishing. So I really like to play with a sentence, because sometimes the same sentence can have the same meaning, but if you write it like this, it feels a bit flat. And if you write it like that, it gives you goosebumps. And I don't know why. And I don't, and sometimes repeating something really works, and sometimes it really kills a notion. Sometimes it's a rhythm. And it's a lot of it is a mystery for me. I didn't study writing. I didn't study creative writing. I'm not a poet, but I love poetic writing and I love playing with words. In fact, poetry, I can only read 1 or 2 poems a year because they're so powerful. They just sort of in my brain, and I wouldn't, if I had to write poetry, I might only write 1 or 2 poems a year as well myself.
I'll make a living out of that.
Sorry?
You can't make a living out of 1 or 2 poems.
No, that's one of the things. That's one of the downsides. Is poets are so powerful. Firstly, their books are so thin, and secondly, people who buy them only read 1 or 2, poems a year. Well, I only do. So it's not about making a living financially, but you do have a big effect on people's souls.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in that.
But I mean, now if we come to book 3, Death on the Limpopo, I think I rocketed through this in 2 days. I could not put it down. Really and truly. I loved, can I gush and say I loved every word in this book? There was not a page, there was not a sentence, there was not a situation that either had me chortling or I did not see that coming. So I've now got to go back because I haven't read the first 2. I've only read this one to date. So my question is, and it stood alone for me. I didn't feel like I'd lost anything on the first one or the second one. So that's going to be my question to you. Did you write it with that in mind, that if people hadn't picked up 1 or 2, that they could pick up 3 and just read it as a standalone?
Totally. Each of the books must stand alone. They must have their own beginning, middle, end. They have their own power and crest and wave. I think it's nicer to read them in order, but I mean, I find that even when I know the ending of a book or the ending where something turns out, the way it's written can still surprise me. For example, with Alexandra Fuller's books, one of her books, I I find her writing so powerful, and then sometimes it's so hectic that I feel I don't know if I'm up to this. So to one book, I knew what it was going to happen. It says so and so is going to die, and it says it on the back of the book. So I thought, well, I'm going to read this book. I'm going to read this book backwards, not word by word, but chapter by chapter, so that I don't get so caught in and so devastated.
Yeah.
But then when it came to the death scene, I was still so devastated because she's written it so powerfully and so beautifully. So I feel, I mean, I hope with a book that's well written that it doesn't matter if you know what's going to happen, because even when something works in a book I've written, when I read it for the 10th time, sometimes the 15th time, it's still got to hit me in the gut. It's still got to give me the goosebumps. There's got to be something in the magic of the power of the words plus the images evoke that are able to do that. So surprise isn't about information. It's about a way, I can go, boo! And even if I say I'm about to go, I didn't get you there. But you can, it's still something is visceral.
Yeah.
And it's woven and it's magic and it's a song, and you can listen to the same song again and again, and you're not like, oh, I know how that is. I'm not going to do that. So I do hope that even if you're new, but I am, for example, there were some twists in book 3 that I don't want to mention because I want them to be twists. And I'm wondering when I write book 4, I also don't want to give away that twist.
Yeah.
Obviously you don't give away. I get very upset when people give away actual murder information on who done it stuff in their future books, because then I don't want to go back and read them. But I feel even some of the emotional and personal twists, I'm still working out how to play it, and I think I'm going to bury them. I'm going to present things in a way that you don't actually know unless you go back and read book 3. And that even if you do know, it doesn't, so because book 2 carries on with Hank, they get together in book 1, but it's still going to be a surprise, and you still should sit there waiting. Oh, are they, aren't they, are they, aren't they, even if you know they are. So
or have,
yes,
but
you don't know, they might to go back and forth, and they could break up.
You see, you can play whatever role you like, and you can do with them. Again, my question is, can you do with them whatever you like, or have they got voices that are so powerful that if you go, you and Henk are going to break up, and Tannie goes, you may think we're going to break up, but no, that's not going to happen. Otherwise, my appelkoos confite and I will bugger off, and you will never see us again.
Yeah. No, there's definitely a dynamic there. And then sometimes it even with simple things, like I've got Tannie Maria going, she's gone to the beauty parlor and I'm sending her home to make lime marmalade with, I think that's in book 3, lime marmalade with cardamom and brandy. And going there, but then she just pops in and she's just looking so hot, and she's never been to a beauty parlor before. Hank's eyes just pop out, and they end up having sex on her desk. Now that I really did not plan. So there are sort of things like that happen that really are part of me. I'll set a scenario, which, occasionally they do change the scenario altogether, but generally I'm a plotter and I've got the framework, and then I feel into each of them and see what would they do. And sometimes it's hard. Like, for example, book 4, I start off by giving Maria and Henk a really, really hard time. I am a romantic, so you can know in the end everything will work out. And she almost says that in the beginning, because she quotes from a movie that they're watching, a Marilyn Monroe movie where someone is murdered, but that's book 4. And it was so hard what happened to her so early that she was really depressed. So I struggled to get her to carry on with the book and to get involved in the murder. Like she just really was depressed, and she got into some hectic overeating. And then I had to go down a route of, this woman really has got a problem. She really has got a problem, and I need to start going to OA meetings and learning more about this problem and addressing it. So it does take me down things but in a way she doesn't really know that I make everything up. So she just thinks, Jack, this has happened. And then she gets so depressed that she doesn't want to function, which makes her a difficult major protagonist, because your protagonist has got to be active and chasing murderers and things. So she doesn't actually say, up yours, Sally, I'm going, because she doesn't know that I'm doing it. But her responses are sometimes so strong that it kills the story. So I've got to then bring in enough juice to keep her chugging along
Yeah,
and give her a reason to
but
carry on.
you let her have sex on a desk, and then she goes, "But hang on a second, that wasn't real. Who is this bitch, and why is she writing about me like that?"
No, she doesn't. She doesn't do any of that.
How did
I
you,
think
when
also,
at the end of that scene, did you sort of sit back and go, "Bliksem, where did that come from?" Or were you
I
had you
did.
prepared
I
for
did. I
it?
said, what about the one? And it's more the other way around. Like, what about the marmalade, Maria? I mean, she really does carry on her own life.
Oh,
And who knows? I mean, I do live in a very old mud house, and who knows? Maybe I'm possessed by some tiny spirit from another time, and I'm just listening to her. There's
you
stranger
may
things
well
that have
be.
happened.
Stranger things have happened to authors, I'm sure, Sally, and you just let yourself go along for the ride, I should imagine. After book 4 and the recipe book, have you anything planned, or is that it for Tannie Maria?
I don't know. I mean, I know I was certainly like had a notion for, although I didn't have the details, sort of as a sub thing in each of my books, they're set. The first one's midsummer. The second one is, what comes after midsummer? Mid-autumn. And the next one
Spring,
is
summer, autumn, winter.
winter. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the one I'm writing now is spring. So I had those 4, and they're also related to, I also thought after 4, I'll have collected recipes from 4 seasons for a cookbook.
Mm.
So it might be a little bit of a pause. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm done with Maria. I mean, to some extent, we may have to see how much international interest continues. So, I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, I won't carry on writing 100 books if no one's buying them. But so far, people are interested in them, and it feels like she's a real person in people's lives. I mean, the people have come up to me and said, "Thank you for this new best friend," and she's now in my life, and she's like this entity. And I think, and I don't move hell of a fast. So each of these things I move every 3 months, but I might, after the cookbook, I might say, oh, well, do I want to jump another year or 2 years? And where do we want to go together? And so it is a little bit of a pause and reconsider. And the cookbook's also an opportunity for Maria to just relax and have fun. There might be a bit of a story in it, but I've put her through the mill, hey, especially in all the books, but especially in book 4. She really is I feel so sorry for her.
Well,
and so in the cookbook, she can just jawl and eat. And all along, all she wanted to do was write a cookbook. She starts saying that in book 1, she wants to write a recipe book. She gets distracted by all this murder stuff. So she's so happy in the recipe book, and she and Henk are just liquor, happy in that book. So we'll have a little pause there, and then start putting her through the mill again.
If you do let her go, will you miss her?
I'll miss her terribly. But then I can just reread books 1 to 4. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people, I mean, like Agatha Christie carried on with Poirot, but I remember her saying at one point, Poirot became like this albatross around her neck, and then she killed him off, which I thought was terribly rude. I haven't read that one, and I never will. You can't kill off a character that lives in people's lives. If you want to stop writing, then don't kill them. That's just really rude.
Yeah, let them walk off into a sunset or something. So maybe one day they'll return. You can't just murder them.
No, I don't know how he died, but I'm not interested in that. So I mean, I do understand that people can be saturated with their characters, but she used to churn them out, so it's easier to get saturated.
Yeah.
I do have an interest in writing a bit more creative nonfiction stuff, and I have written some things like that. I'm writing an extremely exciting, boring book that I started, which is called Binge Sitting. It's about sitting on benches doing nothing, and it's partly what keeps me sane, but in really nice and interesting places, from the Karoo to New York, and kind of a internal healing journey, and a bit of I mean, before mindfulness was popular, it was something I started, but it's much less boring form of mindfulness because you do it on a bench in a beautiful place.
Yeah.
So it's a little more interesting. And then just, I suppose, things I've learned about. I mean, the life lessons, and when my dad died, it was quite a big deal. I've been on a lot of kind of healer spiritual journeys. I'm now doing sound healing. So it's another area of interest that I may or may not want to share about. And it might be more in the kind of eat, love, pray kind of storytelling, exploring themes way. I love Barbara Kingsolver's stories like High Tide in Tucson, where you explore a theme in a creative nonfiction way, which I did with my Stories for Fire Dogs book. So that is another possible genre. And sometimes I write little articles that are a little bit like that, so they get published when a book is promoted. So that could be a direction to go, and I could revise this Harmony Rains book I wrote, sort of the Modesty Blaze Eco Gorilla, as a children's book. But for now, I mean, and I'm advised also by my agent, you stick with the thing that's working and you're enjoying, and you establish your name.
Yeah.
If you want to make a career out of something, you do need to consider what's working. And I enjoy it, and I'm not so attached to the genre and the. I mean, I do love the characters and they do work, so that is something I stay with. But I can enjoy writing in a range of ways.
Great.
So we'll see.
In wrapping up, and thank you so much for spending time with me this afternoon and for bringing Tannie Maria into my life. So the 3 books are Recipe for Love and Murder, The Satanic Mechanic, and finally the current one, Death on the Limpopo. If people want to buy them, are they available online? Do they have to go into a bookstore, given the current situation?
No, everything. I mean, even books deliver now. But I think my publicist would want me to tell you that for the Women's Month of August, there's a promotion on all 3 books. So they're all for $1.99 instead of $2. I think that means $199. I keep thinking it's $1.99.
Yeah.
But, probably
no, not
$1.99.
$1.99, people.
No,
Don't get carried away here.
Usually $2.60 or $2.70, but this month all 3 of them are $199. And then just a small thing to add, in case you want to use it in your video, is that I've done a few short, like 1-minute video summaries of each of the books, like the recipes for them, and I've put them in more interesting setting with different outfits. I'll tell you everything. And also just some about traveling in that Death on Limpopo, and made a traveling video with some of the images from that.
Oh, wonderful.
And so you can either, if you want to take some of them and put them as part of your just says it's 18 hours, my computer says. If you want to use them as part of your video, or if people just want to go to www.sallyandrew.com, there's a whole lot of images and videos that are really fun.
Well, let them go to your website. This goes out as is, with no editing at all. Unlike you that edits your book for a year, I click thank you and that's it. This afternoon I've been in conversation with Sally, and I keep wanting, I knew this was going to happen. When you get something in your head, you get a name in your head, and then you have to fight against it. Now, there is a Sally Williams who makes nougat that I love. So I've had Sally Williams in my head the whole afternoon. So I've got to be very cautious when I say my in-conversation guest today has been Sally Andrew. Sally, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I have loved every minute of this interaction as much as I've loved your books.
Thanks so much, David. And go get yourself some nougat right away.